Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk about the best recordings of Berlioz's Harold in Italy. Harold, that's, Harold. The Harold of Harold in Italy is Lord Byron's Harold. He wrote this long, really awful, today, by our standards, I think, narrative poem called Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. Child, in the medieval sense, Childe, child, meaning a young man who was up for the knighthood or something like that. Anyway, Harold is the typical Byronic hero. Manfred was the other Byronic hero. All of them were sort of descended from Goethe's Werther, the guy who was named after the butterscotch, Werther. Remember him? They're all miserable. That's all you need to know about them. They're all miserable. They wander around talking about how miserable they are, making everybody around them miserable, and being full of doom and gloom. And often they have a notebook for some reason. You ever seen them visualized? They usually have a little notebook or something. I don't know. Anyway, Harold runs around, and at some point in Canto 4 of the 4-part poem, he winds up in Italy. And while he's in Italy, he does absolutely none of the things that are described in Berlioz's Harold in Italy. Because like everything Berlioz wrote, Harold in Italy is about Berlioz. But if he called it Berlioz in Italy, nobody would have paid any attention to it. Or they would have thought he was being terribly self-centered, which of course he was. But then again, so was Harold. So it really doesn't matter whether you're talking about Harold or Berlioz or if he's in Italy or anywhere else. What Berlioz did was take note of the fact that Harold was in Italy. Then he created 4 musical scenes, and none of which have anything to do with Byron's poem. They're all things that influenced Berlioz musically, and wrote a 4-part symphony about himself, in which he is portrayed by the solo viola. Now, the work was commissioned by Paganini, who wanted a virtuoso viola work, but because the whole thing is about Berlioz and not about Paganini or virtuoso anything, the viola part is completely not a virtuoso part. It's melancholic and it's lyrical. And the violist has nothing to do that any, second-grade viola student couldn't do. Well, maybe it's a little harder than that, but not much. And so Paganini rejected it, but then he actually heard it, and he was so impressed by the piece merely as a piece of music that he paid Berlioz a big pile of money at a time when Berlioz really, really needed it. Or he arranged for Berlioz to get the money, or someone gave him money. There's a whole confusion in the scholarship as to exactly where the money came from, as if it makes any difference. It's a marvelous story. Paganini was a good guy, and he paid off Berlioz. Berlioz was very happy, and we have this masterpiece as a result. Now, Harold in Italy is the second most popular Berlioz, large orchestral work after the Symphonie fantastique. It's the only other one really that's not vocal. It requires no vocal forces. And for a long time, it was performed a lot more frequently. And still, in some respects, it will be, because it's a lot easier to do than the Symphonie fantastique. It's shorter, and the orchestra is much smaller and sort of normal sized. So it's a lot easier to get together than the Symphonie fantastique. And for that reason, I think it had a lot more early recordings. In considering the recordings, I have here like 14 or 15 of them. We need to talk about some of the early ones, because there were some very, very famous early recordings of Harold in Italy. And normally I don't really care about historical recordings, because my theory about these things is that there really hasn't been anything done in the past in grungy, horrible sound that you can't get just as well done today in wonderful stereo or digital sound. I think that's true. When it comes to works of the basic repertoire, people have favorites, but that's sentimental. There's no reason for you to ever listen to anything in old, horrible, grungy sound if you don't like old, horrible, grungy sound. There are no aesthetic or artistic benefits to doing that. Believe me. It is the God's honest truth. And so, and I know, all of us here are sort of getting up in age. So I'm speaking as one almost senior citizen to many of you senior citizens. I don't want to hear about your 78s. I don't care if you've got one that you bought in 1942. Listen to something more recent, please, because there's tons of stuff that's more recent that sounds great. And I particularly have a problem, as I've gone through the musical world as a critic, of these sort of, historical recording whack jobs. And they're out there. They're like the piano kookies and the opera nuts and the Baxians and the and the Rubrians and the Bruckner people. Oh God, the Bruckner people. Talk about psychotic. They're all out there, and they're all telling other people, what to listen to. And they want, they're like cult members, and like all cult members, all they're interested in is getting more people to join their cult, and so that they can have the satisfaction of having their own peculiarities ratified and validated. And I'm not into any of that. I'm telling you, if someone tells you you have to get a grotty old recording of something, don't listen to them. They're wrong. Categorically wrong. They may like it. That's their problem. It doesn't have to be yours. So I'm making this rant about historical recordings because, again, it's just one of those things you run into. And I think it's really kind of psychologically unhealthy. And it also suggests to us, which I think is such a terrible thing, that all of the great performances are in the past. All of the great performers are dead. There hasn't been anything done recently that's any good. All of that's total bull. And so we're talking about modern recordings mostly. But Harold in Italy is one of those interesting exceptions because it was sort of a unique work of Berlioz when people weren't recording Berlioz. Everyone did Harold in Italy, like I said, because it was a practical piece to do. It was the only major piece by a major composer that had a solo viola. And in the early 20th century, solo violists started to get going as soloists. And so they all did Harold in Italy. They had no choice, even though it doesn't do anything for the viola. And I have to confess also, when it comes to viola soloists in Harold in Italy, I don't give a damn who's playing the viola. It makes no difference who the violist is. I've seen review after review after review where all they talk about is the viola. It's such a non-happening solo part. You need a violist who plays the viola well, who could play a tune in an attractive, in-tune way. And that's all you need from the violist. You're just as well off, frankly, using the principal viola from a major orchestra as you are using some famous name violinist who happens to have taken up the viola for the occasion, or one of the few famous traveling virtuoso violists. It just doesn't make any difference. So we're not going to worry about who the soloists are. I mean, I'll mention them, but you heard one, you heard them all. And that's the dirty secret behind Harold in Italy performances. But let's talk about there are three major historical recordings of Harold in Italy that you may come across. And they were important historically as early recordings of Berlioz. The first was Koussevitzky, Serge Koussevitzky with the Boston Symphony. This was recorded in 1944. It's with William Primrose. It doesn't sound too bad. This is the Biddulph transfer of the 78s. And, the question is, how well has the performance held up, compared to modern recordings? Not very. It's kind of sluggish. It's sort of not terribly always together, and the sound's lousy. So to hell with Koussevitzky. Now we have Thomas Beecham. Beecham was a wonderful conductor of French music. He was terrific in the music of Berlioz. Not here. The soloist is William Primrose. Wasn't that? Oh yeah, he was William Primrose. They're all William Primrose. Well, you've got William Primrose. Here's the problem with Beecham. Beecham was a wonderful conductor, and his tempos are lively, and his phrasing was unfailingly elegant. He was aristocratic in the way he did these things, and had a tremendous joy in music. And when he's at his best, he's just an irrepressible and joyful maestro. And I love most of Beecham's work. And I have to say, this is on Sony, and And Sony really, really should do, since they're doing monos now, they're going to be doing the Arthur Rodzinski Columbia recordings. They should do Metropolis. They should do all the mono Ormandy stuff, and they should remaster all the Beecham stuff in really good sound, or the best possible sound. Anyway, his Harold in Italy is just kind of lame. It's not bad, but boy, the finale, the orgy of brigands, which nowhere appears in Byron's Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, by the way, but it's much better to end with an orgy of brigands than it is to end with whatever Byron may have stuffed in there. You know, it just doesn't catch fire. It really doesn't. It's not bad. It's not bad, but you can live without it. I mean, it's just, yeah. All right. The one historical recording, I have to say, that has held up, really held up, is Toscanini's, not surprisingly, because Toscanini was Toscanini. I mean, he was really, in some respects, when it came to just his musical impulses, he was sort of in a league of his own. He really was. Even in his old age, even when he got a little stiffer. This is just a rip-roaring, exciting as hell performance of Harold in Italy. And the nice thing about it is that even though it's a scorcher in the orgy of brigands, Toscanini does not become a disciplined freak, at least at the outset. He lets the orchestra play excitingly. He understands that rather than having total rhythmic precision and rigidity and immaculate ensemble, it's an orgy. It's supposed to be a little rough around the edges. And this is a little rough around the edges, but in a good way. It's a wonderful performance. And it sounds pretty good. I mean, it still sounds pretty good. Carlton Cooley is the violist, and it's a terrific performance. It really is. And you can listen to it with pleasure even today, without having to make too many allowances for the mono sound or for the fact that it was done in the creaky days of Berlioz conducting and performance. But now we're going to talk about like a zillion, other ones. This, again, it's not everyone that's out there, but it's a lot of them. And, there will be others. You may have your favorites, but this is a very good sample of the good and some of the bad. And I have to say, I was quite disappointed by this one, which, there's something, let me just preface this. Wait a minute. Pause. Here's the thing about Harold in Italy recordings, performances. They're all pretty similar. I mean, there are differences in accent, differences in phrasing, but not so much in tempo. It's kind of amazing. They all run to like 42 to 44 minutes. The movement timings are almost always the same, within 30 seconds of each other. It's really fascinating. It really hasn't changed much at all. I mean, hardly at all. It's an incredible piece in that respect. You can get performances of the Symphonie fantastique that are all over the place, tempo-wise. But Harold in Italy, no. And there's one notable recording I'm not talking about, and that's Markievicz. And Markievicz does a wonderful Harold in Italy, but the problem is he cuts the finale. Oh, that's a big no-no. So I'm not talking about Markievicz, the one that's coupled with his Damnation of Faust on DG. You wish. But, all right. So let's talk about other Harolds in Italy. And there are bad ones, too, boring ones, like Lauren Mazel's on DG. Okay, so forget that. This one came out, this is one of the most recent. This is Andrew Davis, the other Davis, because Colin Davis gets a chapter all to his own. He is his own canto in Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, as we'll soon see. But this is with James Ennis, who's a wonderful soloist, and the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra under Andrew Davis. The problem with this is that the sound is lousy. I mean, how do you wreck it in this day and age? My God, the sonics make the orchestra sound so small and anemic and lacking in tactile presence. I was so distressed hearing this, because the performance is fine. It's all at the same tempos. It takes, like 42 minutes. I mean, it's exactly the Harold in Italy type thing that we're used to hearing. But no, avoid it. You'd think you want like a modern one because the sound is better. That's truly not. It's just not true. And here's an interesting one. This is kind of a sleeper. that you might find intriguing that I got years and years ago and still have it sitting around in my collection. This is the Czech Philharmonic with Lubomir Mali, conducted by Zdeněk Kozler. So, of course, this is recorded in the Rudolfinum in the Czech Republic, which is an aircraft hangar of an acoustic. It's a big, resonant acoustic that sort of softens all the outlines, but you do get the Czech Philharmonic. And the Czech Philharmonic is a nice thing to have at all times, as you know. So I wanted you to know that they did it and that this exists. I don't know if you can still find it, and I'm not sure it matters terribly much, but it's there. Next. Oh, I like this record. This is John Eliot Gardiner. Now, Gardiner, Gardiner did a bit of Berlioz in his day. He did Damnation of Faust. He did the Symphonie Fantastique. Most of the time with Gardiner, his interpretations are rather cold and somewhat mechanical. And, this is, is this an exception? Not really, but it's a good performance. It's a very good performance. And you've got, Gerard Cosset as the violist. Not that it matters. But the exciting thing for me on this disc is Tristia. I love Tristia. And we don't get to talk about Tristia because Tristia consists of three pieces that Berlioz cobbled together: a Méditation religieuse, the death of Ophelia, and the funeral march for the last scene of Hamlet. And this is a really exciting performance of Tristia, although you can get it with Harold in Italy by other people as well. Still, this is a very, very good Harold in Italy, the Gardiner. It really is. And, you can argue about things like, expression or depth or feeling. And, but when it's as well played as this is and smartly conducted, it's kind of churlish to quibble. Here's another one that nobody talks about, but I really like it because it's Ormandy in Philadelphia. Does anyone mention this? No. And the violist is Joseph Di Pasquale from the Philadelphia Orchestra. It was wonderful. This is also not the most smoking, exciting version out there, but it's Ormandy in Philadelphia. It's gorgeous. It's beautifully played. And you can't go wrong with it. I could rather have a more exciting orgy of brigands. It's kind of a relaxed orgy. Maybe they're smoking a little something to mellow themselves out before the orgy begins. But who cares? It's lovely. These are all just fine performances. A classic version, classic is Charles Munch in the Boston Symphony. Now, this is a little bit controversial among Berliozians and Harold in Italy fanciers because they feel that the finale is a little bit on the stiff side. It just, Munch is famous for letting it all hang out and being totally insanely unbuttoned. And there's nothing slow or excessively inhibited about this finale. Nothing. But on the other hand, it doesn't go insane the way Munch, pardon me. Munch is the guy from Law and Order. Munch is the conductor. The way Munch famously does. Like at the end of the Symphonie Fantastique when everything goes nuts and it's wonderful. People want to hear that kind of white-hot craziness from Munch, and you don't get it in this finale, but in all other respects. It's a glorious performance. And let's see, who's the violist? William Primrose! Oh, William Primrose! It's like when we do the Schubert Trout Quintet. We're going to do that at some point, but the bass player is always Georg Hortnagel. He's like the Trout bass. He goes around playing bass in all the Trout quintets. Well, you get William Primrose. So there's William Primrose. Now, that's Munch. Now we come to the Colin Davis collection, because he recorded Harold in Italy 3 times. It was a Colin Davis specialty. And all 3 times are marvelous. They're all great. The first time was for EMI, now Warner. It's in this Colin Davis box and probably elsewhere. It was with Yehudi Menuhin. And I believe with the London Symphony. I don't know, it's like a million orchestras in here, but one of those people. And it's terrific. It's just absolutely terrific. The second time was part of his Philips Berlioz thing. That's this one, which is the London Symphony for sure, with Nobuko Imai. At least it isn't William Primrose. She's a wonderful violist. And you get Tristia, a very, very good Tristia. So if you don't want to hear Gardiner, and you really want to hear an exciting Harold in Italy, and it's very, very exciting. There's no question about it. This is a great one to get if you want Tristia as well. And the period instrument thing doesn't do it for you. I think this is a warmer and more exciting and certainly more passionate Harold in Italy than Gardiner's. So there you go. Davis 2. However, there is a Davis 3 on the LSO's own label. Here it is with Tabia Zimmerman, another perfectly marvelous violist, and it comes with the ballet music from Les Troyens. It's 11 minutes. What's bad? This is also an absolute smoker of a performance. It's thrilling. It's marvelously played, very well recorded. It's exciting as hell. It's a great Harold in Italy. You got to have a Colin Davis Harold in Italy. Which one you get is up to you, but you got to have a Colin Davis Harold in Italy. I mean, you just don't know Harold in Italy unless you get a Colin Davis. But I have 3 more here, 2 of which are sleepers, real sleepers, and they're worth considering because they're very, very exciting performances. There's this one with Yoav Talmy, believe it or not, in the San Diego Symphony. They did some recordings for Pro Arti at one point, and now this thing is on Naxos. It's awfully good. It's very, very exciting. First of all, it has the violist is Rivka Golani, who's an excellent violist. You get Les Francs Juges Overture and the Reverie and Caprice with it, which is, it's a nicely filled, exciting disc, well recorded. It's terrific. In fact, I want to play you the opening of the Orgy of Brigands because there's something about this performance that I really, really like, and that's the way that Talmy, and in the best performances this happens to, Toscanini and all these people, they make an actual phrase out of the opening theme. The opening theme of the Orgy of Brigands is bum ba bum ba ba da 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 dum ba da 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 dum da 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 dum da 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 dum ba dum bum da 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 dum. It does that sort of. I'm not. It's not exactly perfect, but that's kind of what it does. And you can break it up into individual little bitlets, or you can create a phrase out of it, which makes it, I think, much more exciting because it has forward thrust and movement. And that's what Talmy does here. I hate this glare. There we go. That's what Talmy does. It's really very, very good. So just listen to the opening phrase, just so you get a sense of I think, how it should sound. And one of the things I listen for when I listen to Harold in Italy, when they do the finale. Here it is. See what I mean? Very, very good performance. Absolutely very, very fine performance. But there's 2 more. 2 more we have. Oh boy. It's so exciting. Okay, here's a real sleeper that nobody talks about that we really, really, really need to hear. Zubin Mehta with the Israel Philharmonic. This is with Daniel Benyamini on the viola, and it also comes with Bloch's rarely heard tone poem Voice in the Wilderness for cello and orchestra with Janos Starker. I mean, this is a hot disc. This is on Eloquence, Decca Eloquence. And, I was talking to my friend Christophe up in, Montreal, about Christophe, who's the critic for Le Devoir. We were talking about some of these performances, and he said to me, and he's right, he said, it would really be good for Decca to put together a Mehta Israel Phil box. I mean, you get the Schubert cycle, and you get a lot of other things that people, a bunch of Mahler symphonies, first-class performances. I think it would be of surprisingly high quality. I really, really do. I'd like to have that. So if you're listening, Decca, out there, or Eloquence, maybe you could do it. Just do all the Mehta Israel Phil stuff. We need to do the Vienna Phil stuff with Mehta too, but there's some really good stuff in there. And this Harold in Italy is on fire. Wow, is it exciting and beautifully done. It's a wonderful, wonderful performance and really well recorded. It's terrific. Absolutely terrific. However, all great things must come to an end, and the Harold in Italy survey comes to an end with the all-time, most exciting, most spectacular Harold in Italy, and it's Bernstein, you might have thought, right? It's Bernstein with William Linzer is the violist, and this comes with La Mort de Cléopâtre with Jenny Torel playing Cleopatra. This is just great. I mean, it has a rawness, an intensity, an edge, a gumption, a gusto, you name it, it's on here. And boy, does that orgy smoke. The serenade in the Abruzzi, too, is also wonderful. I don't have the permission to play this, but I can play you a bit of what the serenade sounds like. Do you really know that by heart? You should. It's a wonderful tune. Harold was never in the Abruzzi. Berlioz was in the Abruzzi. And he heard a serenade that sounds suspiciously like an Italian folk version of the opening theme of the first movement of Beethoven's Seventh. Here's a little bit of the serenade here. This is Ptolemy. See what I mean? Beethoven's Seventh, right? We know who Berlioz was listening to before he wrote Harold in Italy. They do the serenade in the Abruzzi. The Abruzzi, in case you're wondering, the Abruzzi is a hilly mountainous region that runs down to the Adriatic Sea. It's east of Rome. Rome is kind of on the west coast of the boot, and the Abruzzi is that way, directly across on the east. And apparently Berlioz was wandering around in the Abruzzi where he heard a serenade, and he stuck it into Harold in Italy. But I'm talking about Bernstein. Bernstein recorded Harold in Italy twice. He also did it in France for EMI with the Orchestre Nationale de France, I think. And it's also just as good. A wonderful, wonderful performance. It's in the big Berlioz box that Warner has put out, which we'll be talking about, the Berlioz Complete Works. So you can get that one too, but you must have a Bernstein Harold in Italy, or you have not heard Harold in Italy. In fact, if you really want to get your Harold in Italy collection in place, you got to have a Colin Davis. You got to have a Bernstein. I would get the Maida, if you can, just because it's such an exciting performance. Ptolemy's worth considering. Charles Munch, you got to have all of his Berlioz. That does you for Harold in Italy. It really does. And you'll be absolutely fine with any of these alone or in combination. You're in very, very good shape. And no need to worry about some of those old creaky ones that people still rave about for some strange reason I don't understand. Take your hearing aids out, folks, and listen to the newer ones. They're really, really good. Either way, we have an obligation to keep on listening to Berlioz's Harold in Italy. Take care.